values.com.
The following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
About money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
So it's Friday afternoon, and we're going to be talking about money. It's Friday the 3rd of July, and here we should be off taking a holiday. But we're on the radio, and we've got a lot to talk about today. I want to talk about Greece, such a small country and such a big reaction. So why? Well, I've got some insight that I want to share with you on that. And, you know, the second quarter actually has just ended. The first quarter was a negative growth. Second quarter, how are we going to do, and how are we going to do for the rest of the year, growth-wise in the economy? I've got some thoughts on that. My guest today has a very fascinating story. You'll want to hear what she has to say. And there's a lot of press about the top 1%, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. I think that may be changing. Economists have been confused as to why the unemployment rate should be down as low as it is, and we're not seeing more movement at the low end. There may be changes coming about with the most recent labor reports. I've got that coming up later in the program, but I want to talk about Greece, a very small country. So small that if the GDP went to zero, there would be really no impact on the world. So why such a fuss over Greece? You know, if you look at the situation in Greece, they've had a sluggish economy since 146 before the current era, before Christ. And that was when one city-state after another was conquered by the Roman Empire. Since that time, they've had a sluggish economy. It's not something new. That's a couple millenniums long. More than a couple centuries, a couple millenniums, over 2,000 years it's been sluggish. And on their debt, they've defaulted 6 times in the last 150 years. Since they became independent, they were part of the Ottoman Empire. They became independent in 1832. And since that time, they've defaulted 6 times on their debt. You know, it's an economy that's marked by inefficiency and corruption. You know, those are part of the Greek economy that has been part of the economy for centuries. But if you also look at Greece, and if you've been to Greece, if you've traveled to Greece, you know, it's a marvelous country. They've got Delphi. They've got Corinth. They've got the Mycenaean beehive tombs, the Parthenon, so much of their treasures of antiquity. And they've given so much. When you look at what the contributions have been with Archimedes, with Plato, with Socrates, with Homer in the Odyssey and the Iliad, with Oedipus and the whole literature, they've given so much in that respect. And if you look at the country itself, if you visited and seen the olive groves, and I remember once driving from Athens to Delphi and seeing the people that were actually living in the caves, not because they were forced to, but it was a choice. They were picking olives. They were living in the caves. It's a very creative and industrious people. They're not, if you've been there, you know that they're not pessimistic, that they're not downtrodden, they don't feel that way. So how did they reach this point of default? The most current point of default. Well, if you remember, we came through the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. And during that time, countries understood, central banks understood that central banks become the lenders of last resort. When you have a financial crisis, there's two ways out of it. There's austerity or there's stimulus. For the last 8 years, I've been talking about stimulus or austerity. And I took, in the beginning, before all this really unfolded, and I guess it's not been 8 years, it's been 7 years, but close enough. I talked about the French economy and the English economy following the wars. The French economy under Louis XIV, when England chose a path of austerity, France chose a path of stimulating the economy. France went through very few problems. England and both countries had a huge amount of debt that they had to pay off. England chose austerity, and it lasted for decades. Both got out of it. In fact, the French got out of it in such a way that it became so opulent that a number of people lost their heads in the French Revolution. That was the first programs that I talked about, stimulus or austerity. Central banks knew that they needed to stimulate. Asia did. The U.S. did, and so did Europe. And during that period of time, from the failure of Lehman Brothers, when that went under and the financial crisis really began, or the crisis became obvious, countries began to stimulate. Central banks began to pump money into the economies. But in 2010, Europe decided they'd done enough stimulus and they needed to back off. We went through a similar time in 1937 when we felt we were through the Great Depression. We could back off. We could start increasing taxes. We could start taking care of the debt. And if you're a student of history, you remember the Depression didn't end in 1937. We continued on until World War I, but that's another story. As the economy was recovering, and it was recovering significantly in Europe, they decided to take a path of austerity, of cutting back, of reducing stimulus, of doing away with stimulus, and instead trying to use their power to force a number of countries into submission and into a more efficient operation of their governments. And one of those countries was Greece. But it wasn't just Greece. Remember the term pigs? Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain. All of those countries, the southern European countries primarily, those were countries that had economies that had increasing debt and structural problems within the countries in terms of their debt. And so, in order to get through that, the European negotiators, in order to loan money to Greece and to Spain and to Italy and Portugal, they imposed some significant austerity measures. So for Greece, in the last 5 years, since 2008, 2009 actually, in those years, their economy sank 25%, 26% actually. Unemployment rose to 25%. You know, putting that in context, it would be like the United States losing California, Florida, and New York. All the output of California, Florida, and New York. That's what it was like in Greece. That's what it is like in Greece. That's where they stand. They have cut 2.9 million retirees. They've cut their pensions by 45%. It's a country of 11 million people. That's almost 1/3 of the people whose pensions have been cut. They owe $360 billion. That's a huge amount for 11 million people. It's 180% of the GDP. Compare that to the U.S., where our debt is about 50% of GDP. So they have 3.5 to 4 times what we do in terms of debt compared per capita that we do, or per GDP. And it became obvious they're not going to be able to pay on time. You know, the European negotiators could have seen that coming. They could have said, we see what's happened. You know, there's been a lot of reform that's been done. There's been a lot of things that have been done. We know that Greece is working their way out. but they didn't choose to do that. Even as they were beginning to negotiate and could see that Greece was not going to pay on time, they moved for further cuts, further restrictions. Barron's did an article in 2011 saying that what needed to happen is Greece's debt needed to be cut by 50%. Actually, Greece went through and gave a haircut to private investors, those investors who bought bonds from Greece. However, the state bonds that were owned by other countries did not take a haircut. Theirs continued to be paid and demand in full. So here we stand with a country which has made significant progress in the reforms, but now the negotiators are demanding even more. Politically, they're in a situation that for 5 years their economy has been dropping, the unemployment's been going up, and people's income has been going down. What kind of a reaction do you think that's going to be? It's not going to be a positive reaction. And right after we come back from break, I'm going to talk about the reaction and where we are today. Don't go away. We've got more to say.
Stay tuned. About Money returns in a moment with your host, Mike Adams, here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Lots of people manage investment portfolios. Just a few can manage a successful portfolio and provide exceedingly great service to their clients. Here's Mike Adams from Adams Financial Concepts.
We believe the price you pay should be based on the performance of your portfolio and the quality of service you receive.
You know, Mike, it seems that a lot of companies subscribe to the one-size-fits-all mentality of investing. Does one size really fit all?
Not with us. Every portfolio that we manage is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. We place our client's interests first in all portfolio decisions.
If you're looking for a home for your 7-figure plus investment portfolio, call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts, specializing in creating and maintaining wealth for over 20 years. 206-903-1019. That's 206-903-1019. Or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Your business leader for Seattle is 1300 KKOL. Now we return to About Money. There's more information waiting for you at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here again is your host, Mike Adams.
So I've been talking about Greece, a small country, a big problem, a big issue. And in some ways you'd wonder why it should be such a big issue. But we're going to get to that. First, for the first part of the program, I talked about Greece and what's gone on. They have an economy which has sunk by 26%. They've got 25% unemployment. This has been going on for 5 years. And even last year, when it looked like the economy was beginning to pick up some, their debt is coming due, and it's a huge amount of debt per capita or per their GDP. It was obvious. It's been obvious for a couple of years. They're not going to be able to make the payments on time. And their European creditors, instead of looking at that and saying we need to renegotiate, instead of doing that, they wanted more austerity. They wanted to bring the people down even further. 45% cuts to pensions of the retirees were done. And they have a funny system. A lot of people retire before they're 55 even, and will take second jobs and they'll do other things. But even that, cutting the pensions by that amount, that's a significant impact. 25% unemployment, significant impact. So instead of negotiating and saying, they need to work their way out, and everyone knows, no matter what happens at this point, it's going to take 10 or 15 years for them to come out of this situation. But instead of saying we need to work with them and get them through this process, they wanted more austerity. And so what happens? The New Democratic Party, the president, the premier of the New Democratic Party, Samaras, had been elected a couple years before, had gone through the negotiations, but then was running for election. And the new party, the Cesar Party, ran on the promise to to reject the cuts, to roll back the reforms, and to stop privatization. That was their whole point. That was what they ran on. They were fed up with what the European creditors had forced on Greece. And instead of the creditors realizing what was going on, they just sat back and waited for it all to happen. And it did. It made things worse. And we're in that situation. So why worry about Greece? You know, their total debt, if you just look at their debt as a part of the GDP of Europe, their total debt is only 3% of that GDP. It's 180% of theirs, but they're a very small country with a very small GDP. So why is it such a big issue? There's a lot of people that have been talking for a number of years that Greece just needs to drop out of the Eurozone. You know, you're having problems, you just drop out of the Eurozone. Well, what happens if that actually were to happen? And 2 years ago, when this whole thing began, I said Greece would not come out of the Eurozone for this reason. If Greece drops out of the Eurozone, if they drop the euro, their currency, they'll go back to the drachma. And almost immediately, their currency is going to drop by 50%, or maybe even more compared to the euro. The products suddenly become much less expensive for other countries to import because they're cheap. And at the same time, Germany's products, French products, Italy's products going into Greece are going to be twice expensive, maybe 3 times. It's going to be a very big positive for Greece because the products they export will be cheaper on the world market, and the ones they import are going to be so much more expensive, it's going to drive people to cut back on what they buy. The common market, the Eurozone, before they went to the common euro, back when every country had their own currency, at the Maastricht Treaty, they set up certain rules for countries to stay within the common market. And one of those countries was Italy, which was out of the norm, out of the regulations, out of the guidelines that were set up. And so Italy got kicked out of the common market in 1991. And you look at what happened. Italy had its own currency, the lira. Immediately, the lira dropped to 50% of what it had been valued before. It was out of the common market. And their exports started going through the ceiling. Their imports began to drop down. They began to pay down their debt. They began to deal with their problems. And by 1998, they were back in the common market and part of the Eurozone. All of that taking place because they were forced out of the common market. So that's the situation with Greece. If they drop out of the Eurozone, they're going to have a positive, it's going to have a positive impact for the country itself. On top of which, they're going to be able to just say, we're not going to pay the debt, just go away. That's going to have some impact, but not a huge impact. What will have a big impact is, remember I talked about the pigs? We talked about the pigs before. Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. Greece is a very small part of that. Portugal is a little bigger, but Spain and Italy are very large. And they're under the same kind of austerity as Greece is. Spain's unemployment, over 20%. Italy's unemployment, very high. Think of what it would be if Italy was back on the lira and Spain back on, I don't remember what currency the Spanish people were on before. Their currencies drop by 50%. Suddenly they become very inexpensive for their products. Their exports go up, their imports go down, and the impact is on countries like Germany and France and the Netherlands. The impact is significant. And there was a meeting this last week with Merkel and her cabinet talking about if Greece goes out of the Eurozone, how do you stop the contagion? As we talk more and more about Greece, the question is going to become more, if they leave, how do you prevent the contagion from spreading to other countries? Because there will be a significant, very significant impact if that happens. And there's one other factor that goes into it, not one that's mentioned very often, but at the end of World War II, when the world was divided up after Germany and Japan had been defeated, and you had the leaders of the United States and Britain and Russia dividing up the countries, one of the bargains that was made is that the Balkans would go to the USSR and Greece would go to Western Europe. There was a significant discussion about Greece becoming part of the USSR. And there's still, in many parts of Greece, more identification with Russia than with Western Europe. In fact, Putin was there, and we can guess that not only would Putin like to increase his influence in Greece, he'd like to have Greece as part of the Russian Empire. I mean, think about it. It gives Russia access to the Mediterranean. That's very significant. He understands that. I think some of the leaders of Europe understand that as well. Having Greece in the Russian sphere of influence is not the best thing to happen. That's not talked about very much. It's been about the debt, about the financial, but there's a political aspect and a world aspect that goes into it as well. No matter what happens, Greece has to rebuild. It's going to take 10 to 15 years. But when you look at Greece, there's a lot of positive in the country, and the people are positive. You know, they may be driven out of the Eurozone, but the impact is going to be significant. It's a small country, but a very big impact. And now you know the rest of the story. So my guest today has a very special story to tell. Fedra Deckman. Let's start. Welcome to the program, Fedra.
Thank you.
Fedva. I struggle with that. Anyway, welcome to the program.
Thanks.
So why don't we talk and start with your background?
Okay, I was born in Turkey in the place called Mardin, which is on the border between Syria and Turkey. And when I was 7 years old, we moved to Istanbul, and all my education has been in Istanbul, and finished the University of Istanbul. And for a year, I took German and looked for a job and couldn't get a job because I almost got a job working at the airport, but at that time I was asked about the religion, and I said Christian, and I didn't get the job at the airport. And then I didn't see any future for me there and applied to the University of Washington, came here for my graduate school. I finished in 73, long time ago, and I went to Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, and I did research at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I couldn't handle the cold. I came back to Seattle. And for a year, I didn't know what to do with my life, and took interest test, and everything came about people and travel, and that is how I got into the travel agency.
Awesome. We're going to come back to that. We're coming to a commercial break. We're going to come back and talk about the travel agency and the travel business. So don't go away. There's more to come. And if you miss any part of this program or some of the previous programs, you'll find this program at the end of the week. And the other programs are already there on a podcast on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Click onto the website and also sign up, and you'll get a $5 Tango card or Starbucks card. But that's coming later. Right after the break, we'll be back with Fedva.
About Money. We'll resume in a moment with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Your business leader for Seattle is 1300 KKOL. We're back with more About Money. For details on what you hear on today's show, visit adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Now, here again is Mike Adams.
So I'm here with Fedra Dykman. We were talking about her background, being born in Turkey, educated in Turkey, coming to the U.S., and doing studies in Minnesota. Not excited about the cold in Minnesota, coming back to Seattle. And taking an interest test that said she should be involved with people and travel. So let's pick it up from there. Tell us more about that.
About the travel agency?
Uh-huh.
So when I went to, my degree is in geography and environmental studies. So when my interest showed travel, I went to a travel agency. And I said, I would like to become a travel agent. And I still remember the woman, she said, have you gone to travel school? And I looked at her and I said, I have master's in geography. And the woman, she said, do you have you gone to the travel school? Then I realized that I had to go to travel school. I went to travel school and got a job at the university travel, which was by the University of Washington. And I worked for them for about 4 months. And my supervisor, I was in the group department, and that is the year the Huskies, they were going to the Rose Bowl. And I was in charge of the planes to get the group from the University of Washington alumni. And the agency, I was a controller. The agency, before they offered it to the university alumni, they opened it to the public. And I started getting reservations that were not alumni. And I felt very close to the university and saying that we should not do that. And that created a little hassle at workplace because I was siding with the university. So anyway, after I did that, I left that agency. I went to another travel agency to get experience. Working there, I realized that I had to open my own agency. And after 2 years, my brother is by trade electrical engineer, and he had a very good business, job at Boeing in flight control at 737s. And I asked him if he would like to open a travel agency with me. And we didn't have penny, and my father, I asked him if he can loan us money because we had to be bonded by $10,000. So he said yes. And that is how Dickman Travel started. And we rented a place on First Hill because I wanted to be close to the hospitals and the academic people. And I even bargained for the rent. It was $250, and I got it for $200. And the place was a storage space by Virginia Mason, and we did everything from painting to changing the place. It was 9 feet wide, and we had to have custom-made tables and desks, and there was no running water at the beginning. And the first agent that I hired, I had to interview them on Madison. There's McDonald's, and that is where I interviewed the people to work for me in McDonald's. And so one by one clientele, I built it, and before we closed it, I had about 70 people working for me. So beside having the retail office, which I was in charge of, that we had both vacation and also I did a lot of the commercial, which I did University of Washington and Virginia Mason, Swedish Hospital. So those were my client base. And we also had wholesale division, which was putting packages together. So it wasn't the escorted tours, it was just the basic package, which included the land, air, and transfers. That's the package. And we controlled the Mexico market, I would say 99%. So if you had used a travel agency and you wanted to go to Mexico, high percentage it would have used our wholesale, which was Escape Tours. And so we had a big, we enjoyed it. It was a fun at the beginning, but toward the end, it wasn't.
So going back to the beginning, and your office space was 9 feet wide. How long was it?
Oh God, we had space to put 3 desks and a small entrance. At the entrance, we had 2 chairs for people to sit when they come in. And I still remember it was an old space, and they had the heater hanging from the ceiling, and my desk was at the last one, and when it takes off, it starts blowing air. And I had a client that was sitting next to me, and when he was leaving, I stood up to shake his hand, and the heat took off, and my hair and the paperwork and the whole bit. It was, we have gone through, basic stages till you build up the business. And so. And
sometimes those are the fondest memories, right?
Yeah, it was memories. And then we were in that location for about 4 years, and then I was approached by Swedish Hospital to move my office to Nordstrom Tower. So on the Nordstrom Tower, the street level, it is all commercial space. And we were the first renters over there. And Swedish, what they did is that they gave us 4 walls, and the ceilings were very high. And so what we did is that we did 1.5. So we built a second floor over there in the space that we were renting. So Swedish, when a lot of other places, they lowered the ceiling, so it was 1 level. In our case, I left it high, so Swedish came back. They wanted to charge us 1.5 of the rent, and we said no. So I was at the Nordstrom Tower for about 10 years, and the tower wasn't built. It was only the parking space right above us, and then when they built the whole building, I mean, if I had the business mind, I would have charged them, because we lost business because the phones are ringing, and because they were drilling and building, we couldn't hear. Some days we lost a lot of business. We couldn't. So anyway, live and learn.
So that was a time in which it seemed like if you walked through the mall, you could see 5 or 6 travel agencies. There was almost a travel agency on every corner. Today, all that's disappeared.
Yes.
So Dyckman Travel doesn't exist anymore either. So when did things change?
Well, it was, I closed in 2002. And it was about, I would say, 5 years before that, things started, changing. And then when the computer came, I mean, we were one of the sites for the computers to be installed in a travel agency to see how they are going to be doing. And we had the United Airlines computer. So after that, the internet, started affecting the business. And then by then, the airlines started cutting the commission. And I think it was Delta Airlines that started, or American Airlines cut the commissions. And the travel agency really made the profit from selling airline tickets So we were getting the commission from the airlines. We were getting commissions from the hotels and the cars. So that was really the income that's coming. And it was a very, very fine line. So as a wholesale, when we were putting the packages together, let's say airfare, transfers, taxes, and hotel accommodations, we had the profit that we were making $35 per ticket. So the profit margin was so slim that you had to be very, very careful, because one mistake can make you go out of business. And when the internet started, and then there was the Expedia, and there was all these agents, companies started coming into the market that was supported by the orbits, that was supported by the airlines, and we couldn't compete because the business started, they are cutting on the commissions for the travel agency, and the commission was mostly from the airlines that was coming in. And when they cut that, so there is no income coming in, and you have a business to run, and like any other businesses, like Nordstrom's or any other commercial, you have to pay rent, you have to pay the taxes, you have to pay your staff, you have to pay for utilities, and everything started going out and nothing coming in. And in my situation, the thing that happened was the September 11, it hit, and everybody was canceling. So we were refunding all the tickets that was issued that were traveling to Mexico, and you are refunding without collecting a penny, and you had to continue paying the dues and everything to the staff, and you start going into the hole.
Yeah. We're coming up to another commercial break. Don't go away, because we'll finish this story after the break. Don't go away. You're listening to Mike Adams with Adams Financial Concepts, and our focus is to give you insight into different industries, different businesses, so that you can be ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve. Don't go away. We've got a little more to go before the 4th of July weekend really begins. We'll be back in just a minute.
More about money coming up with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Lots of people manage investment portfolios. Just a few can manage a successful portfolio and provide exceedingly great service to their clients. Here's Mike Adams from Adams Financial Concepts.
We believe the price you pay should be based on the performance of your portfolio and the quality of service you receive.
You know, Mike, it seems that a lot of companies subscribe to the one-size-fits-all mentality of investing. Does one size really fit all?
Not with us. Every portfolio that we manage is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. We place our clients' interests first in all portfolio decisions.
If you're looking for a home for your 7-figure plus investment portfolio, call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts, specializing in creating and maintaining wealth for over 20 years. 206-903-1019. That's 206-903-1019. Or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Your business leader for Seattle is 1300 KKOL. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I'm here with Fedva Dickman. She just corrected me. I've been pronouncing it wrong this whole time. Anyway, we got it right, hopefully this time. We talked about the travel agency. The business built up, it built down. Now, what are you doing today? You've recovered.
I recovered, and now I am in another people business in the real estate. I am in the residential real estate, and I am with Windermere Madison Park office. So I have been doing real estate for the last 12 years.
And so if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Can I give my phone?
Sure.
Oh, okay. It is 206-852-5595, or they can go to windermere.com, and I am the agent.
And what area do you cover?
I am mostly core Seattle, but I do a lot of with buyers too, so that are relocating. So I have covered really everything from Bellevue to Kirkland to up north to Mukilteo to Mill Creek and down south to Des Moines. So wherever people, depending on their budget and what they are looking for and where their job is. And when you are working with buyers, it's really, you do this search in the areas that they will fit in and the schools. So there's so many different issues, and you find the right place for them.
Well, and I know you do an excellent, marvelous job.
Thank you.
Give us the phone number and the contact information.
It is Fedva Dickman at windermere.com or 206-852-5595.
And spell Fedman Dickman.
It is F like in Frank. I will do it like the travel agency. F like in Frank, E like in Edward, D like in David, V like in Victory, A, D like in David, I, K like in Kilo, M like in Mary, E like in Edward, M like in Nancy at windermere.com.
And if you're thinking about real estate, do contact her.
Thank you.
I want to shift a little bit and talk about 6 reasons why I'm positive about the rest of this year. I think second quarter GDP is going to come in very well. First quarter GDP was disappointing, but we went through the weather issues. We went through a number of things. And an economy that is going slowly, we've experienced this before. I've talked about this any number of times on the program before. 1980s, the concerns were essentially the same, very slow growth. And today we're experiencing very low growth. But I think we'll start to see things pick up, maybe as high as 3.5% for the rest of the year. I think one of the things that's happening is consumer spending has really surged. And I say it's surged. It was 0.9% last month. And the economy is driven by the consumer. 70% of GDP is consumer driven. And consumer driven means is a broad scope of thing from real estate and housing to healthcare. But it's a significant portion. And when people are beginning to spend that money, and I don't think it's a surprise, when gas prices have dropped a couple bucks a gallon, people have extra money in their pocket, and we're starting to see the impact. Didn't happen immediately, but we're starting to see that. I believe that's going to continue. Personal income is up 0.5%. And let me digress a little bit because we're running out of time. There's a lot of talk about the top-end wage earners, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, but that may be changing. 5.3% unemployment rate. There was a time when economists said that it was never going to get below 7. Now we're 5.3. But if you look at what's going on in the country, McDonald's and Walmart and Target and TJX are all giving raises. By the way, none of those companies do my clients own, but they're giving raises. And they need to do that to attract more job applicants and to keep the ones they have. Many of those employees haven't seen a raise in 5 years. The $15 minimum wage in Seattle has not had a negative impact. And when you look at the numbers in the last job report, the biggest increase is in the low end. So maybe it's beginning to change. And those are people who will spend. That's a reason why I believe personal income is up 0.5%. It was up 0.5% in April. And I believe a lot of that's going to be spent. That's going to drive the economy. Household wealth has risen and is rising. It's at $84.9 trillion. That's a record number. It's up $30 trillion from the Great Recession. Stocks account for 13.6, individual stocks 13.6, that's a direct ownership, and another 7.9 trillion in mutual funds. Both of those are records. Housing, less debt is 11.7 trillion, and it's not been that high since 2006. Home ownership is up to 55.6%. from 38.7% in 2009. Not as high as it was at the beginning of 2008, but we're on our way. And if you need a house, talk to FEDVA. If you want to sell, talk to FEDVA. The housing construction, not only is it picking up, but when people buy a new house, they also buy appliances and drapes and whatever, and that's driving things up. The average house price has been increasing. $230,000 is now the median price for homes, and we haven't seen that since 2006. The supply of homes on the market nationwide is down to 4.5 months. That means there's pressure on house prices to continue to increase. Another reason, small business is more confident. The National Federation of Independent Business, the index stood at 98.3 in May. 104 was the highest in December of 14. When you have over 100, it's a time of small business expansion. We're seeing small business expand. And with all those factors, that drives capital expenditures, capital investment. It's not going to be far behind when you have everything else. Housing and consumption, you're going to see capital investment increase. I think all those things are going on. That's a reason to see the economy start to move. 3.5%, 4.5%, it's all possible by the end of the year. For those people that are negative and feeling that things are going to plunge off the cliff, I don't believe it's going to happen. I don't believe that Greece is going to bring us down. I don't believe that there's much that's going to bring us down. The fear of the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. We went through that last year. Remember, the first three quarters of the year, people were worried that the Fed was going to quit buying bonds and that was going to sink the economy. It didn't. They quit buying bonds, didn't sink the economy. Now the fear that they begin to raise interest rates, it's not going to have an impact. Over the last part of this year, I think we have a very positive market coming up. I think things are going to be good. Doesn't mean we won't go through a correction. Doesn't mean we won't go down 10%. But in many ways, some companies are going through that correction anyway. I think it's going to be a fine finish to the year. And I think it sets up next year, which is a presidential election year, could be, except for all the advertising, a fun year to be around. Anyway, you've been listening to Adams Financial About Money by Adams Financial Concepts. I want to wish you a very happy 4th of July. For the past 2 years, I've talked about a 4th of July that happened in the accelerator, the discovery of the God particle, the Higgs boson particle. Maybe next week I'll talk about it again. But until then, join me next week when I return to talk about money. Have a great 4th of July.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you want Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Friday afternoon at 3 for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on Money Radio 1300 KKOL.
The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Your business leader for Seattle is 1300 KKOL.
Values.com.